Okay, so we're just sitting here politicking, reading Banished Knowledge by Alice Miller. Wait, I just get situated. All right. So, namaste, Brock. Okay, so we're on page 42, actually 43. All right, so actually we've moved on to 44. Even if the copulation urge were already active in newborn infants, which of course is utter nonsense, why should that be regarded as culpable? Sexuality is a natural urge that can't be held responsible if some people resort to it to impair or destroy the lives of others. Such people become culpable, not because they succumb to the copulation urge, but because in their history this urge was coupled with other factors such as cruelty, humiliation, and the exercise of power, and because on the basis of this history they act destructively. When they include sexuality in their destructive acts, sexuality cannot be blamed for those acts. Taking the example of Jurgen Bart's, I demonstrated in For Your Own Good how a person who has been tormented in childhood becomes culpable and how misleading it is to hold his sexuality and alleged uncontrolled drives responsible. A small child cannot be cruel for the simple reason that he is defenseless and unable as yet to take revenge on others for torments he has suffered, except perhaps on small animals. The child has not yet power to destroy human lives, even though of course he can and must harbor murderous thoughts and vengeful desires in his imagination. So I'm going to reread this paragraph, it's important. Taking the example of Jurgen Bart's, I demonstrated in For Your Own Good how a person who has been tormented in childhood becomes culpable and how misleading it is to hold his or her sexuality and alleged uncontrolled drives responsible. A small child cannot be cruel for the simple reason that he is defenseless and unable as yet to take revenge on others for the torments he has suffered, except perhaps on small animals. And I'm going to stop there because that particular statement right there has been documented in profiling serial killers. Okay? So, taking revenge and tormenting on small animals. And you look at the rhetoric that's out here today, people calling other humans by names of animals, calling them a dog, derogatory statement, calling them a rat, calling them a duck, calling them a sheep, calling them, all kinds of animals in a derogatory way. And that's what this is from childhood, from the suffering. And that right there, everybody, is a known characteristic of a serial killer. So by conditioning and grooming that characteristic, that known characteristic, okay, that is horrible. That does not take rocket science, scientist level intelligence to recognize that and what that is doing, where that has been going. And systematically pushing the remains of abducted, tortured, raped, murdered, slaughtered animals. That's not right. Um, so we're gonna move on here. A young pediatric analyst who practices according to Melanie Klein's method once told me, "You obviously have no children of your own, otherwise you would know that children are not, as you describe them, innocent, but have cruel imaginations. This can be observed even in the way an infant smacks its mother. I didn't immediately tell this young analyst that I am the mother of two children. Instead, I asked her what she meant by smack. She described a child who, in a frenzy, hit his mother's face with his hands, with his fists even. She said, although she herself had no children, she had observed such behavior on several occasions. Moreover, mothers of children who were her patients had reported the same behavior to her. I tried to query her certainty. This smacking, I argued, might also be a harmless game. It depends on how the mother sees it. It is only if the mother feels humiliated and beaten, if she confuses the child with her own parents and resorts to pedagogic measures, that what began as playful behavior on the part of the child can turn into frustration and assume destructive traits. The child then feels misunderstood, and the only way they can express their frustration is by hitting the mother's face with their fists. If I describe such a situation to someone who hasn't been trained for 10 years in the Kleinian theory, I am immediately understood. But this analyst looked at me with suspicion as she said Melanie Klein spent all her life working with children, and her theories were based on her observations. That's precisely the point. What kind of eyes are doing the observing? A mother sees her frenzied, screaming child and is firmly convinced that children must be disciplined. After all, that is what she learned from her mother, and those early lessons are extremely effective. Melanie Klein observed her child and the other children in her practice against the background of her own upbringing, and apparently couldn't see beyond what she had learned in her own youth from her mother. Since time immemorial, gynecologists, nurses, and parents have observed screaming newborn infants, and parents have observed screaming newborn infants and have likewise remained blind to the fact that those screams are the expression of psychic distress and are altogether avoidable. My assertion that the infant is innocent to to has nothing to do with romantic idealization, nor is it derived from this or that philosophical evaluation. It stems rather from the reality of the child's situation. A baby is defenseless and as yet bears no responsibility for others. As yet they owe nobody anything. But this fact does not contradict the frequent observation that children can behave very cruelly, just as cruelly as they have been treated by others. Aaron Pizzi, founder of Shelters for Battered Women and Children, reports that there are even some 3-year-olds who cannot tussle playfully but fight each other as if to kill. In their behavior, these children reflect in every detail the brutality they experienced at home and reveal unmistakably where they learned their destructive behavior. I am often asked by worried parents whether children are learning cruelty from television. In my view, a child who harbors no pent up rage will show no interest in brutal and sadistic TV programs. However, brutal programs are avidly absorbed by children who have never been allowed to defend themselves against overt or subtle tormenting at home or who, for other reasons, can never articulate their feelings. For example, to spare a threatened parent, so they can satisfy their secret longings for revenge by identifying with what they see on TV. These children already carry with them the seeds of future destructiveness. Whether or not this destructiveness will erupt depends largely on whether life offers them more than violence in their words, whether witnesses willing to rescue them cross their path. However, it's important to recognize that there are other children that look at those types of scenarios in a defensive mechanism of on how would they survive in that situation. So they're not looking at it from a thing of like, oh yeah, that's they're getting killed. Yeah, from a sadistic point of view. There are those that do that. Granted, we crediting that from Alice Miller. But we want to also include those that do not look at it from that perspective. They look at those types of programs in a way of being able to defend themselves in that particular type of situation. Namaste. See you another day.